we are one trade embargo away from the end of the Chinese system. And the cult of personality that we have in Beijing is much tighter and much more incompetent than anything we've got on the Russian side of the equation. If China were to dissolve tomorrow, however, I don't think that appreciably changes what the Russians would do. The Russians see this accurately as a battle for their national survival. And nothing as simple as the loss of their primary international ally is going to change what they do. The only thing that would theoretically force them to change tact is if you had a change of heart in Beijing that included them putting 1 million men on their northern border with the Russians. That would get Moscow's attention. But I don't think that is in the cards for any time soon.
How long could China, because it's always tied up much more economically with the rest of the world, how would it fare if it had the same kind of sanctions against it that the world's imposed on Russia?
Good question. I'd say 3 to 6 months. Remember that Russia is the world's largest or second largest oil exporter and the world's second largest agricultural exporter. China is the world's largest importer of both of those things. And if you put the same sanctions on Beijing that are on Moscow right now, you would get a famine and a deindustrialization collapse in well under a year, complete with famine.
It would be. You think they know that, and that has any impact? Because we see one of the questions he touches on this that was posted is, I mean, if China's going to do something, it's going to have to do something in Taiwan soon. But it's got to know, well, it's not going to be a free walk across the ocean, that the world's going to gather together and impose sanctions.
4 years ago, I was very confident that Chairman Xi was fully aware of his exposures. But in the last 4 years, he has purged the system of anyone who will tell him anything. Not anyone who will tell him the truth, anyone who will tell him anything. There is no information flow within the Chinese system any longer because he's shot the messenger so many times. So it's entirely possible now that Chinese propaganda is actually what he believes. And give you an idea of just how extreme that this has gotten. You guys remember that spy balloon nonsense from last year? Okay. I initially had the same thought as President Biden when the balloon came over. Let's shoot the thing down. Let's see what we're dealing with. Clearly, it was a spy balloon. The balloon was 350 feet in diameter. It was dangling something the size of an Embraer jet that carries 70 people. So clearly, it was a spy platform. The Defense Department and the CIA talked him out of that because, like, Mr. President, it's not going to get anything. It's going to go over the missile silos. The missile silos are going to be closed unless you decide you want to launch a missile at the time. They're not going to get anything they couldn't get from orbit. But it's an opportunity for us to put a slow-flying spy plane above it and a slow-flying spy helicopter below it, get whisper sensors on it from the ground, and track for the next 9 days. And in those 9 days, we figured out how they were transmitting commands to it over satellites and over the civilian network, where those commands came from, not the city, not the building, not the floor, not the office, the specific IP address of the computer involved. And that allowed us to track every individual person who was involved in the process, as well as get a complete copy of their encryption keys. We got more information out of China in those 9 days and the days since than we have in the last 30 years. It was the intelligent coup of the decade. We now know that Xi was unaware of it. We now know that the Chinese military was unaware of it. It was just something the Chinese Intelligence Bureau who thought this is what it meant to stick it to the Americans. And he dealt China the biggest geopolitical blow they have felt this century. And all we had to do was sit there and watch and listen. This is what state collapse looks like. The incapacity of a government to be aware of what its dumbest members are doing.
If you had to rank the U.S. in terms of our ability to conduct cyber warfare against any other country, including China, how would you do that?
Oh, we'd be first.
I know you consult with Langley, some, and some others.
Yeah, we'd be first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. The United States has more offensive hacking capacity than the rest of the world's governments combined. It's just that we're not flashy about it, and we're not doing espionage in the traditional way. We're not trying to steal corporate secrets and then give them to Ford. We're simply hacking everybody's networks every single day so that when the hammer does drop, we have the ability to get into everything all at once. The Chinese obviously are focused more on corporate theft than anything else, and we're not great at defending against that, but it's not the same tool. So we would probably take down their computer and their electricity networks in a matter of hours, if not days, and then it would remain off for this foreseeable future. They would have to basically de-digitize their entire system and work without computers that were networked in any way in order to fight back against what we were capable of doing. And again, 4 years ago, they knew that.
Interesting. Anybody here who is attending in this auditorium have a question they want to ask Peter?
Hi, Peter. So the first time that you came to Burn Foreman and spoke to us, I don't remember how many years ago that was. Toward the end, I asked you from a domestic standpoint what you saw as sort of the biggest or one of the biggest existential threats to the continuation of our government and our system and all of that here. And you mentioned several things, but one of the things you focused on was the cartels, drug, fentanyl issues, and southern border issues kind of generally. Do you still sort of have that same view, and just ask you to speak about that for a minute?
I still think that's the number one threat. There's this number two threat that's rising rapidly. So let me deal with both of them because unfortunately they do interact. The status of the cartel wars is that the Sinaloa cartel, the big one that has dominated most of the drug trafficking in the United States, is breaking up. We got El Chapo, we removed him from the equation. There are now a half a dozen leaders battling out for supremacy, and it's kind of fallen apart as an organization. And the new organization that is kind of rising to take their place is called Jalisco New Generation. They are much more violent, but so far they have not succeeded in getting a foothold in the plazas, much less north of the border. And as long as that is the case, then the violence from the drug war is mostly south of the border. If they do cross north, they're not going to have this business-oriented mindset that Sinaloa has had, where they don't go after American citizens as a rule. They will go in and they will shoot sheriffs and bomb police centers, and we'll have a very, very different conflict on our hands. And we will almost overnight think of things like trade in Mexico in a very different light. Hasn't happened, doesn't mean it will happen, but that is my concern. The second thing that I'm really concerned about is the existence of Donald Trump in this presidential election at all. He has a lot of ethical baggage. He's already been voted out once. He's now campaigning under indictment, and a plurality of the people who identify themselves as Republican will follow him to the end. And as long as that is the case, the Republican Party is no longer the party of math and maps and business and national security and rule of law. And that is a loss. I have always considered the Republicans to be the adults in the room, and now they're being just as ignorant as stupid as the far left has always been. And that has changed the nature of the political conversation. And it means that the other factlessness that we're used to seeing out of the more socialist wing of the Democratic Party has now come for the single largest wing of the Republican Party. And that makes it very difficult to have a political conversation in this country. And that unfortunately looks like it's going to fuse with the drug war.